The stranger grabbed my wrist just before I stepped toward the security line. "Don't get on that plane." Her voice was barely louder than a whisper. I looked behind me. My son, Daniel, was already walking away. He had dropped me off at the airport less than 3 minutes earlier, hugged me, told me to call when I landed, and disappeared through the sliding doors. Everything about the morning had seemed normal, almost painfully normal. But the woman standing in front of me looked terrified. I stared at her. "Excuse me." She glanced toward the terminal entrance, then back at me. "Your son gave you that suitcase, didn't he?" My heart stopped. I looked down at the black suitcase beside my leg. "Yes." She swallowed. "Then whatever you do, don't take it onto that plane." Before I could ask another question, she walked away. Not ran. Walked. As if she hadn't just changed the course of my life. I stood there frozen, surrounded by hundreds of strangers rushing toward their gates. And then I noticed something. The suitcase wasn't mine. Not exactly. It was the suitcase Daniel had insisted on buying for me 2 days earlier. He had said my old one was embarrassing. He had laughed when I told him it looked perfectly fine. "Dad, you're flying across the country," he'd said. "At least look like you belong in first class." I smiled at the memory. Then I stopped smiling. Because Daniel had never once called me Dad like that. Not in years. He usually called me Pop. That tiny detail suddenly felt important. And I had no idea why. Welcome to Father's Hidden Reckoning. Thanks for being here. Tell us where you're watching from. Drop your city or country in the comments. This story contains fictional elements for entertainment and educational purposes. Any resemblance to real people, places, or events is purely coincidental. But the message behind this story may stay with you long after it ends. My name is Michael Bennett. I'm 62 years old. And until that morning, I believed my son was the one person in this world who would never betray me. I was wrong. But I didn't know how wrong. Not yet. I had arrived at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport at 8:17 that morning. My flight to Seattle was scheduled for 10:05. I was traveling alone because my wife, Linda, had passed away 11 months earlier. Seattle was supposed to be a fresh start. Linda's sister had offered me the guest room in her house for a few weeks, and I'd finally decided to leave Texas behind for a little while. I wasn't running away. I just needed somewhere that didn't have Linda's fingerprints on every part of my life. Her coffee mug was still beside the kitchen sink. Her gardening gloves were still hanging beside the back door. Her favorite blue sweater was still folded over the chair in our bedroom. 11 months later, I still couldn't move it. Daniel had been worried about me. At least that's what I thought. He had visited more often during those 11 months than he had during the previous 3 years. He brought groceries. He helped with bills. He called almost every evening. And 3 weeks before my flight, he had said something that made me believe my son was finally becoming the man I'd always hoped he would be. "Dad, I know Mom would want you to live." I remembered those words as I stood in the airport. I also remembered his hug that morning. It had lasted longer than usual. "Call me when you land," he told me. "I will." "And Dad?" "Yeah." He smiled. "Don't worry about anything anymore." At the time, I thought he was trying to comfort me. Now those words sounded completely different. I pulled my phone from my pocket. I considered calling him. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the stranger's warning. Maybe it was the suitcase. Or maybe some part of me had already started remembering things I had deliberately ignored. I walked toward a bench near the baggage area and sat down. Then I opened the suitcase. Clothes. Toiletries. A pair of shoes. My medications. A folder containing Linda's medical records. Everything looked normal. I checked the inside pocket. Nothing. Then I noticed something strange. The suitcase had a hidden zipper near the bottom. I hadn't seen it before. I opened it. There was a small brown envelope inside. My name was written across the front. Not Dad. Not Michael. Just Michael Bennett. My hands became cold. I opened it. Inside was a single photograph. It showed Linda standing beside Daniel. But the photograph wasn't from our family album. I'd never seen it before. They were standing outside a bank. And on the back, someone had written 6 words. Your wife knew what he did. I read it twice. Then a third time. My phone rang. Daniel. I stared at his name. I didn't answer. The phone stopped. A few seconds later, a text appeared. Everything okay, Dad? I looked at the photograph again, then at the suitcase, then at the airport departure board. My flight was still 20 minutes away from boarding. I had a decision to make. If I called Daniel, I might warn whoever had put the photograph in my suitcase that I had discovered it. If I went to the police, I would have to explain why I was carrying an envelope I hadn't known existed. And if I boarded the plane, I might never discover why a stranger had told me not to. So I did something that, at the time, felt completely irrational. I left the terminal. I walked outside, found a quiet bench near the parking garage, and called the one person I knew I could trust. My wife's younger sister. Susan. She answered on the fourth ring. Michael. Susan, I need you to listen carefully. She went silent. What's wrong? Did Linda ever tell you she was afraid of Daniel? The silence on the other end lasted so long that I thought the call had dropped. Then Susan whispered, Yes. My stomach tightened. What? She told me something about him 2 weeks before she died. I stood up. What did she tell you? Susan breathed in slowly. She said if anything happened to her, I should never let Daniel convince you to sell the house. I looked toward the airport windows. The people inside looked tiny from where I stood. What else? She said there was something in the house. What? I don't know. You don't know? She wouldn't tell me over the phone. Why? Because she thought someone was listening. I felt the blood drain from my face. Who? Susan's voice cracked. Michael. She said she didn't trust your son. I sat back down. For 11 months, I had believed Linda's death was the result of complications following a routine procedure. Daniel had been the one who handled most of the paperwork. He had told me not to worry. He had dealt with the insurance company. He had helped me organize Linda's belongings. He had even recommended the lawyer who prepared the new estate documents. I had trusted him with everything. Susan continued. There's something else. What? 3 days before Linda died, she called me at 2 in the morning. I closed my eyes. What did she say? She said, if Michael ever tells you Daniel is innocent, don't believe him. I couldn't speak. Susan started crying. Michael, I wanted to tell you months ago. Why didn't you? Because Daniel called me the morning after the funeral. My eyes opened. What did he say? He told me Linda had been confused near the end. I stood again. He said she was taking medication and imagining things. My jaw tightened. He made me feel guilty for believing her. I looked at the suitcase. The airport suddenly felt very far away. Where are you now? I asked. Home. Stay there. Why? Because I think Daniel knows something. There was a pause. Then Susan whispered. Michael. What? I think he knows you're asking questions. That was when I heard the sound behind me. A car door closing. I turned. A black SUV was parked across the street. My son's SUV. Daniel's vehicle. My heart slammed against my ribs. He had told me he was driving home. He wasn't. He was still here. Watching me. I grabbed the suitcase and walked quickly toward the parking garage. My phone rang again. Daniel. I answered. Hey, Dad. His voice sounded calm. Too calm. Where are you? At home. He paused. You sure? I looked back. The black SUV was gone. Yeah. Good. Another pause. Did you get on the plane? I stared at the suitcase. No. Silence. Then Daniel laughed. Not naturally. Nervously. Why not? I forgot something. What? I don't remember. He didn't respond. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. Dad, you need to get on that plane. I didn't answer. Do you understand me? His voice had changed. It wasn't the voice of the son who had hugged me that morning. It was the voice of someone trying to control a situation. Why? Because Seattle is where you're supposed to be. Supposed to be? Yes. Why? He breathed heavily. Then he hung up. I stood in the parking garage listening to the echo of my own breathing. For the first time in my life, I was afraid of my son. But fear wasn't the only thing I felt. I felt something else. Anger. And underneath the anger was a question I couldn't stop thinking about. What exactly was Daniel so desperate to keep me from discovering? I drove home. I didn't call the police. Not yet. I wanted to know what I was dealing with first. When I reached the house, I noticed something immediately. The front door was locked. But the deadbolt wasn't. I always locked it. Always. I entered slowly. Nothing appeared disturbed. The television was off. The kitchen was clean. Linda's chair was still by the window. I walked into the bedroom. The closet was exactly as I'd left it. Then I saw the dresser. One drawer was open. I knew I had closed it that morning. I walked over. Inside were Linda's old scarves. Beneath them was a small wooden box. I hadn't seen it in months. I opened it. Inside was Linda's wedding ring. I had thought I'd buried it with her. But underneath the ring was a flash drive. A tiny black USB drive. And taped to it was another note. If Michael finds this, Daniel has already failed. I sat on the edge of the bed. I found my laptop. I inserted the drive. There was only one file. A video. The timestamp was from 11 months ago, 3 days before Linda died. I clicked play. Linda appeared on the screen. She was sitting at our kitchen table. Her face was pale. Her eyes were red. She looked directly into the camera. Michael, if you're watching this, I'm sorry. I stopped breathing. She continued. I don't know how much time I have. She looked toward the kitchen doorway, then back at the camera. Daniel is in trouble. I stared at the screen. Not because someone is threatening him. Linda swallowed. Because Daniel is the person threatening me. The room seemed to tilt. I paused the video. I couldn't continue. I walked to the window. Outside, our street looked completely ordinary. A child rode a bicycle. A neighbor watered flowers. A delivery truck passed. Nothing had changed. Everything had changed. I returned to the laptop. Linda's recording continued. Michael, I need you to understand something. Daniel didn't steal money from us because he needed it. She took a shaky breath. He stole it because he believed it belonged to him. I stared at the screen. Linda explained that several months before her death, she had discovered withdrawals from an investment account. At first, she believed I had authorized them. Then she discovered something much worse. Daniel had been transferring money through a company that didn't exist. A shell company. Linda had confronted him. He denied everything. Then he begged her to stay quiet. She refused. And that's when Daniel told her something she had never forgotten. If Dad finds out, he'll lose everything. Linda had asked what he meant. Daniel had answered. Because everything is already in my name. I paused the video again. My hands went numb. I checked the property records on my laptop. The house. The investment accounts. The life insurance policy. The documents Daniel had encouraged me to sign after Linda's death. I opened one file. Then another. My stomach twisted. The house hadn't been transferred yet. But there was a pending application. Daniel had been preparing to sell it. And the buyer wasn't a stranger. It was a company connected to the same shell corporation Linda had mentioned. I leaned back. Suddenly, the airport made sense. Daniel hadn't wanted me in Seattle. He wanted me gone. But why? Then I remembered the suitcase. I opened it again. This time, I searched every pocket. The bottom lining felt strange. I ran my fingers across it. There was a hard object beneath the fabric. I cut the lining open with a small pocket knife. Inside was a second phone. Not mine. A cheap prepaid phone. It had one message. When he boards, activate the transfer. I stared at the screen. Then another message arrived. Make sure he never comes back. My hands went cold. This wasn't about money anymore. Someone had planned for me to disappear. And Daniel wasn't acting alone. I immediately called Susan. Get out of your house. What? Now. Michael, what's happening? Daniel has someone helping him. I told her everything. She began crying. Then she said something I hadn't expected. Michael, there was another person. Who? Linda's doctor. I frowned. What about him? Linda told me she thought he was involved. Why? Because after her procedure, he called Daniel before he called you. I froze. Are you sure? Yes. I searched through Linda's medical papers. There it was. The doctor's name. Dr. Robert Hale. I looked at the date of Linda's final hospital visit. Then I looked at the video timestamp. 3 days before her death. Something wasn't right. I searched my email. I found an old message from Daniel. It contained a scanned document from the hospital. I opened it. Then I noticed the signature. The doctor's signature had been copied. It wasn't a real medical report. It was a forged document. Someone had altered Linda's records. But why? I suddenly remembered the folder in my suitcase. Linda's medical records. Daniel had insisted I take them to Seattle. Why would he want those documents with me on the plane? Unless... I opened the folder. Page after page looked ordinary. Then I found one page that didn't belong. It was an insurance authorization form. The beneficiary had been changed. My name was crossed out. Daniel's name was written underneath. And the date of the change was 6 days before Linda's death. I stared at it. Daniel hadn't just been stealing money. He had been preparing for Linda to die. The thought was unbearable. I wanted to believe there was another explanation. There wasn't. Then my phone rang. It was Daniel. I answered. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, he said, "Dad, where are you?" "At home." That's not what I asked. I looked at the laptop. At Linda's face frozen on the screen. Why did you put a second phone in my suitcase? Silence. I heard him breathe. Then, you should have gotten on the plane. My voice shook. What did you do to Mom? He didn't answer. Daniel. Still nothing. Then he said, Mom made her choice. I closed my eyes. What does that mean? She chose you over me. What are you talking about? She was going to tell you everything. His voice cracked. She was going to destroy my life. I whispered. You destroyed your own life. Daniel laughed softly. You still don't understand. Understand what? The money wasn't mine. I frowned. Then whose was it? He didn't answer. Instead, he said, Look under Mom's chair. The line went dead. I stared at the phone. Then I walked into the living room. Linda's chair sat exactly where it had been for years. I lifted it. Nothing. I checked underneath. Nothing. Then I noticed the floorboard beneath one leg looked different. I knelt down. There was a small seam. I pried it open. Inside was a metal box. I pulled it out. The box contained 3 things. A passport, a handwritten ledger, and a photograph. The passport belonged to a man named Ethan Cole. I had never heard of him. The ledger contained dozens of payments. Some were from Daniel. Some were from the shell company. But the largest payments came from a company called Cole Financial Holdings. I looked at the photograph. It showed Daniel standing beside Ethan Cole, and standing behind them was Dr. Robert Hale. All 3 were smiling. On the back of the photograph, Linda had written, They think I don't know who Ethan is. I searched the name. Ethan Cole wasn't a businessman. He was a convicted fraudster, and according to an old newspaper article, he had been released from prison 6 months before Linda died. My phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. You should have stayed on the plane. Then another. Now they know you have the ledger. I looked toward the windows. The street was empty. Too empty. Then headlights appeared at the end of the block. A black SUV. I grabbed the ledger. I grabbed Linda's flash drive. And I turned off every light in the house. The SUV stopped outside. A door opened. Footsteps approached. Slowly. 3 knocks sounded against my front door. I didn't move. 3 more. Then a man's voice called through the door. Mr. Bennett? I recognized it. Dr. Robert Hale. I held my breath. He spoke again. I'm here to help you. I almost laughed. Because Linda had warned me about that exact sentence. The doorknob moved. Once. Twice. Then stopped. I quietly moved toward the back door. My phone vibrated. A text from Daniel. Don't trust him. I froze. For the first time, I wondered whether Daniel was trying to warn me or manipulate me. Either way, I knew one thing. The truth was bigger than my son. Much bigger. I slipped through the back door and moved into the alley. I didn't know where I was going. I only knew I couldn't stay. I drove to a motel 40 minutes outside the city. Then I called a lawyer. Not Daniel's lawyer. A different one. Her name was Rachel Morgan. I explained everything. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Mr. Bennett, don't confront anyone yet." Why? Because if the documents you're describing are authentic, this isn't simply an inheritance dispute. I know. No, she said. I don't think you do. What do you mean? The shell company you mentioned? Yes. I know that name. My stomach tightened. From where? My firm represented a client in a federal fraud case 2 years ago. What happened? The case collapsed because the key witness disappeared. Who was the witness? She hesitated. Ethan Cole. I stared at the motel wall. Everything suddenly connected. Ethan wasn't just helping Daniel. He was the person behind the entire operation. But there was still one question. Why had Linda been killed? Rachel told me to send her copies of everything. I did. Then she said, "Michael, there's something else." What? The insurance beneficiary change. What about it? If Linda was legally incapacitated when it was signed, the document could be challenged. She wasn't. Rachel was quiet. Are you sure? Yes. She may have been. I remembered the forged medical report, the fake signature, the altered records. Someone had created a story that Linda was confused and incapable of making decisions. And if that story were accepted, Daniel could control everything. Rachel asked me to send the medical documents. I did. 20 minutes later, she called. Michael. What? This report was altered. I knew it. No, she said. You don't understand. What? The original report says something completely different. My heart started pounding. What does it say? Rachel paused. It says Linda told the doctor she was afraid someone was poisoning her. The room went silent. Who? She didn't name anyone. Then Rachel said. But she wrote something in the margin. What? 3 initials. I closed my eyes. Which ones? Rachel answered. D.B. Daniel Bennett. My own son's initials. I couldn't breathe. Then Rachel said something that changed everything. There is one more problem. What? The original medical file doesn't belong to Linda. I opened my eyes. What? It belongs to another patient. Who? Rachel's voice became quiet. Ethan Cole. I sat completely still. That meant the medical records had been switched. And suddenly I understood why the suitcase mattered. The documents Daniel had put in my luggage weren't just evidence. They were the pieces of a story someone wanted investigators to believe. A story in which Linda was sick. A story in which I was grieving. A story in which Daniel was the loving son handling everything. And the final piece of that story was supposed to be me getting on a plane. I looked at the prepaid phone. The message still glowed on the screen. When he boards, activate the transfer. Rachel asked me, Michael, did you tell anyone you're still alive and in Texas? I said no. Good. Why? Because we're going to let them think you boarded that plane. I stared at the wall. What? You wanted justice? Yes. Then stop trying to catch them. She paused. Let them come after you. That was the moment my fear changed. It became something else. A plan. For the next 4 days, I disappeared. Rachel contacted federal investigators. Susan stayed somewhere safe. I gave investigators every document I had. The flash drive, the ledger, the photographs, the fake medical records, the prepaid phone. And then we did something Daniel never expected. We made him believe I had left the country. A photograph was taken of me at the airport. An old boarding pass was used as part of the deception. A friend of Rachel's sent Daniel a message saying I had been seen boarding a flight. Daniel believed it. Because 2 hours later, he called the person he thought was dead, Ethan Cole. Investigators recorded the call. Daniel said. He took the bait. Ethan asked, "What about the documents?" Daniel replied, "He doesn't have them." I almost smiled when Rachel played me the recording, because Daniel was wrong. I had everything. But the most important evidence hadn't been discovered yet. It was hidden in Linda's house. The thing she had been protecting until the day she died. The thing Daniel had been desperate to find. The thing that would finally prove what happened to her. A second camera. Linda had installed it herself, and she had hidden it in the one place nobody would ever think to look. Inside the old clock above our fireplace. Investigators recovered the footage, and what it showed was the moment everything changed. 3 nights before Linda died, Daniel entered our house. He wasn't alone. Ethan Cole was with him, and Dr. Hale arrived 20 minutes later. They sat at our kitchen table. Linda wasn't there. Daniel opened a folder. Ethan leaned forward. Then Dr. Hale said, "She won't cooperate." Daniel answered, "She doesn't have to." Ethan asked, "What about Michael?" Daniel looked directly toward the camera and said, "Dad will believe whatever I tell him." I stopped the video. I couldn't watch anymore. But Rachel told me there was another recording. A recording from the following night. Linda had returned home. She entered the kitchen. She saw the 3 men. And she immediately knew. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She simply looked at Daniel and said, "You're going to regret this." Daniel stood. "Mom, please. You think your father is stupid? No. You think grief makes him weak? No." She pointed toward the hidden camera. "You're wrong." Daniel's face changed. For the first time, he looked afraid. But Linda wasn't finished. She said, "Michael knows." Daniel whispered, "He knows everything." That was a lie. At that point, I knew nothing. But Linda had said it because she understood her son. She knew fear was the only thing that could slow him down. Daniel turned toward Ethan. "Find the evidence." Ethan nodded. "And if she talks?" Daniel stared at his mother. "She won't." The recording ended. Rachel looked at me. "Michael, we have enough." I shook my head. "No." She frowned. "No. I want to know what happened next." She didn't answer. Because we both knew what that meant. I wanted to hear Daniel confess. Not because I needed revenge. Because Linda deserved the truth. And I needed to hear it from the man who had taken it from her. So we created one final trap. I called Daniel. For the first time in 5 days. He answered immediately. "Dad." I lowered my voice. "I know." Silence. Then, "Know what?" "Everything." He didn't speak. I continued. "I know about Ethan." "Nothing." "I know about the insurance." Still nothing. "I know Mom was afraid of you." Daniel finally whispered, "Where are you?" I smiled. "Exactly where you don't expect me to be." He thought for a moment. Then he said, "Dad, I can explain." Then explain. "I never wanted Mom to die." My chest tightened. "What happened?" He started crying. Real tears. Or convincing ones. "I made mistakes." "What kind?" "I borrowed money." "How much?" "Too much." "And Ethan?" "He was supposed to help me." "Help you do what?" Daniel said nothing. "Sell the house." Silence. "Take the insurance?" Nothing. "Kill Mom." He began sobbing. Then he said, She wouldn't stop. I closed my eyes. What did you do? I didn't touch her. Who did? He whispered a name. Ethan. I opened my eyes. The recording continued. Daniel had no idea federal investigators were listening. He kept talking. He told me about the money, the fake company, the insurance policy, the altered medical records. He told me how they had planned to make Linda's death look natural. And then he admitted the reason I had been sent to Seattle. It wasn't simply to get me away. The plan was to make my death look like an accident after I arrived. My blood went cold. Then I asked the question I'd been carrying for almost a year. Daniel. He went quiet. What happened to your mother? His answer came almost as a whisper. I was there. I couldn't speak. I didn't stop Ethan. Why? Because I thought she was going to destroy me. I stared at the wall. You chose money over your mother. He cried. I was scared. No. My voice became calm. You were greedy. Silence. Then I said, and now? Daniel whispered. Now I know I lost everything. I ended the call. The next morning, federal agents arrested Ethan Cole. Dr. Robert Hale was arrested 2 days later. Daniel was arrested outside his office. The investigation continued for months. The house was frozen. The insurance company opened a fraud investigation. The fake medical records were traced back to the hospital computer system, and Linda's original records were finally restored. Her death was re-examined. The official investigation concluded that the evidence supported a deliberate poisoning. The case went to court. Daniel eventually pleaded guilty to multiple charges. He lost his business. His accounts were seized. The house was returned to me. But none of that brought Linda back. That was the hardest truth. Justice could punish the people who hurt her. It couldn't undo the hurt. 6 months later, I finally went to Seattle. Not because I was running away. Because I was ready to start living again. Susan helped me pack. This time, I chose my own suitcase. An old brown one Linda had bought me years earlier. At the airport, I stood beside the gate. I looked at the planes outside. For a moment, I remembered that morning. The stranger. The warning. The suitcase. The photograph. And the question that had changed everything. I never found out who the woman was. Investigators searched security footage. They couldn't identify her. She had entered the airport less than 10 minutes before she approached me. She left through a different exit. No record. No name. Nothing. But I still had one thing she gave me. The brown envelope. Inside it was the photograph of Daniel and Linda outside the bank. And beneath the photograph, written in Linda's handwriting, were 6 words. Your wife knew what he did. For months, I wondered how that photograph had gotten into my suitcase. Then, just before I boarded my flight to Seattle, Susan called me. Michael. Yeah. I found something in Linda's old things. What? A letter. My heart skipped. What's in it? Susan hesitated. It's addressed to you. I sat down. Read it. She unfolded the paper. Then she said, Michael, if you're hearing this, I need you to know that I was never afraid of dying. I closed my eyes. Susan continued. I was afraid you would spend the rest of your life believing the wrong person. My throat tightened. The airport around me disappeared. The voices. The announcements. The rolling suitcases. Everything faded. Then Susan read the final lines. And that's where I finally understood why Linda had hidden the truth for so long. Not because she didn't trust me. Because she knew exactly how much I loved our son. And she knew the truth would destroy something inside me that could never be repaired. I sat there with the letter in my hands. And for the first time in nearly a year, I allowed myself to cry. Not because I had lost Linda. I had been grieving her every day. I cried because I finally understood her last act of love. She hadn't been trying to save herself. She had been trying to save me. And as my flight was called, I stood up. I looked toward the window. The sky was turning gold. I picked up my suitcase. And I walked toward the gate. Not knowing that, waiting for me in Seattle, was one final piece of Linda's story. A piece that would force me to question everything I thought I knew about the last year of her life. When I finally landed in Seattle, Susan was waiting for me outside the terminal. She hugged me without saying a word. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then she handed me Linda's letter. I unfolded it myself. The handwriting was unmistakable. Michael, if you've made it this far, then the truth finally found you. I wish I could have told you everything myself, but I knew you would try to protect Daniel. That's what fathers do. They believe their children can still become the people they once dreamed they would be. I don't want you to spend the rest of your life hating him. I want you to understand something. What Daniel did was his choice. You didn't fail him. I didn't fail him. He made his own choices. And you must never let his choices become the reason you stop living yours. Sell the house if you want. Keep it if you want. Travel. Laugh again. Fall in love with life again. Just don't spend your remaining years standing at the door of the past, waiting for someone who isn't coming back. I loved you until my last breath. And if there is one thing I want you to remember, it's this. The people who betray us can take many things. Money, trust, time. Sometimes even the people we love. But they don't get to decide what happens to the rest of our lives. That part is still ours. Love always. Linda. I read the letter twice. Then I folded it carefully and placed it inside my jacket. Susan looked at me. You okay? I looked through the airport window at the planes rising into the evening sky. No, I said honestly. Then I smiled. But I think I'm going to be. A year later, I sold our old house. Not because Daniel had wanted it. Not because Linda's memories were painful. I sold it because I finally understood that memories don't live inside walls. They live inside us. I kept Linda's garden chair, her blue sweater, her coffee mug, and the old wooden box that had started everything. I moved into a smaller house near the water. I started traveling. I learned how to cook the meals Linda used to make. I even planted roses. I was terrible at it. Susan laughed the first time she saw them, but I kept trying. Because Linda had taught me something without ever saying it directly. Life isn't about avoiding pain. It's about refusing to let pain become the end of your story. Daniel eventually received his sentence. I never visited him. For a long time, I thought that meant I was still angry. Then I realized something. I didn't visit because I wasn't angry anymore. I simply didn't need anything from him. Not an apology. Not an explanation. Not revenge. The truth had already given me what I needed. And sometimes that's the greatest form of justice there is. The stranger at the airport was never identified. Maybe she was someone connected to Linda. Maybe she knew more than investigators ever discovered. Or maybe she was simply a person who saw something wrong and chose to act. I still don't know. But every time I hear an airport announcement, I remember her words. Don't get on that plane. At the time, I thought she was saving my life. Now I realize she was doing something much bigger. She was giving me the chance to discover the truth. And the truth saved more than my life. It saved whatever was left of my future. Because sometimes the people closest to us know exactly which lies we'll believe. They know which buttons to push. They know which memories to use. And they know that trust can become the strongest weapon against the person who gave it. But there is one thing they can't control. The moment you stop believing the lie, that moment changes everything. If you've ever trusted someone who didn't deserve it, remember this. You don't have to spend the rest of your life punishing yourself for someone else's betrayal. Their choices belong to them. Your future belongs to you. And sometimes justice doesn't arrive with a dramatic courtroom speech or a perfect revenge. Sometimes justice is simply waking up one morning and realizing the person who hurt you no longer controls how you feel. That's what Linda gave me. Not revenge. Not closure. Freedom. And as I watched my plane disappear into the clouds that evening, I finally understood why that stranger had stopped me. She wasn't telling me not to fly. She was telling me not to disappear. And I never did. I kept living. For Linda. For myself. And for every father who has ever believed that loving someone meant ignoring the truth. Because sometimes the hardest thing a parent can do isn't forgiving a child. It's accepting who that child has chosen to become. and then choosing who you are going to become afterward. If this story touched you, remember one thing. Trust should be earned, truth should be protected, and your life should never end where someone else's betrayal begins. This is Father's hidden reckoning. And sometimes, the truth doesn't knock on your door. Sometimes, it whispers your name at the airport,